If you're trying to learn multiple complex subjects all at the same time, say mathematics, philosophy, a foreign language, and a hard skill for success in your career, you might wish someone would just tell you a couple of things, like exactly how much time you need to dedicate to each subject or skill every day, and exactly how to retain 100% of everything you read and study so you never forget it. And it sounds perfectly logical to ask such questions, but if you really want to succeed as a polymath or someone who masters multiple skills, you really need to understand a brutal truth. These are not real questions. They are what sometimes philosophers call pseudo questions. And the biggest reason so many brilliant people fail is because pseudo questions breed highly seductive pseudo answers. So what you want to do is ask real questions and avoid pseudo questions, because a true question is a question that has an answer. For example, what is the German word for gratitude? I think it's Dankbarkeit. That's a true question because it can be answered and you can memorize the word, and then you can go and look in a dictionary and verify. Ah, yes, Dankbarkeit. That is gratitude, right? And I'm going from memory. I could be wrong, but that's the whole point, right? You could figure out the right or wrong of it. But a question that asks for a specific fixed metric, a cookie-cutter timeline, or an absolute state of perfection and when it's going to land, when perfection doesn't even exist per se, well, this is a big problem. And there's something about time that is talked about in this book that I'm going to share later, but it's really, really important. This is The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. I highly recommend it. But when a subscriber to this channel asked me recently and said they were trying to balance math and philosophy and German and even learning how to be a better salesperson, I had to smile because my own life has been exactly this kind of multidisciplinary puzzle solving to build this channel and the Magnetic Mary method. I had to jump between finishing a PhD in the humanities, lecturing on film studies because I was already teaching as a professor, and that wasn't the only course I was teaching. I had to teach writing and all this sort of stuff. I had to learn new languages, and I had to learn all kinds of skills like writing scholarly papers. And I was also, I had a little press of my own at the time, a small press, and I had to sell those books. And the business skills required to do even just a small little publishing operation were huge, and we handmade our own books. So at least from my experience in the trenches that I've worked in, there is no answer to the question of how much time you should spend on any topic or skill. Now, sure, a university guidance counselor can hand you a brochure and say, this program takes 4 years, followed by a 1-year practicum, blah, 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 blah. But we all know that life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And if you want to make God laugh, as they say, tell him your plans. And I've seen that myself most recently with my bookstore project. Things went pear-shaped like I never even imagined possible. But there's something to embracing things for what they are as they are. And the successful polymath must, at some point, completely let go of the need to know how long things are going to take. And one thing that I keep coming back to is something I learned from this book, Happiness Beyond Thought, and other books related to this topic, which is the idea of karma yoga, which is letting go of the outcome. And that can be very, very difficult, but you just show up and do what you need to do, and you don't worry so much about how long things are going to take. Now, there are dimensions and nuances of time that I'm going to share with you today. Talk about Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and other people. But at the end of the day, if a guru or a guide is giving you a timeline, well, they may be ignorant, or they may be people who do not have your best interests in heart. So I see this in memory training constantly. People ask me, well, how long is it going to take me to master the core mnemonic systems? And look, I've seen some people soar within a single weekend. They literally sit down and follow the steps that I put before them, and they do amazing things. Even if I'm not the teacher, I've seen memory competitors smash world records within 6 months of having read half a memory book. I've also seen really, really brilliant people take 2 years to accomplish their goals after humming and hawing and dabbling, and then eventually they finally get into it and then they go. And, there's no judgment here. Reality is complicated. And true polymathy requires you to constantly monitor your mind, to spot the pseudo questions that cannot be answered, and ruthlessly get rid of them. So, how can we dismantle this trap? Well, let's look at some of the most common pseudo questions that derail would-be learners who want to be masters and replace them with real, actionable strategies based on what is most likely to work across multiple disciplines. So the first trap is, how do I balance my time between subjects? Is time really something that can be balanced, right? Like, what are you going to say? Study subject A for 45 minutes, then subject B for 30 minutes, and never deviate from this plan. The reality is that you can generally rotate between texts, and it's called interleaving. You can actually get quite scientific about interleaving, and I have done it to great benefit. Just to give a general example, the semester might require 15 books or whatever. So I'd go in on Monday and I would take 3 to 5 of those books, and I would read book A, let's say, and then switch to book B, and then switch to book C. Then on Tuesday, I would switch from book C to book B and then read book A. And then on Wednesday, I'd start with book B and work with book C and then A, and on, rotating that way. And I was really, really happy with that, and it really, really worked. But at the end of the day, there are things that interrupt the schedule. And, you can't feel like you've failed, and you can't go and then abandon your reading habits. You have to stop managing time sometimes and just give the attention you have in the time that you have it. There were some years in university where I worked 3 jobs, and one job in particular, the foreman Wilson used to say, "Hey, you want overtime?" And overtime would sometimes go until 3 a.m. because that particular job started at 3:30 p.m. until midnight, and then, just work and work and work and work and work. And I had to follow that opportunity. And that's part of how you do karma yoga, just showing up, doing the work, and letting go of the outcome. You follow the natural momentum of what's going on in your life, and you don't resist it, but you go with it, and then you put your focus on what you can when you can. And this is not really balancing things. It's certainly, you could think of it as juggling, but when I had to study, there was never any such thing as Pomodoro technique and having a little timer, right? It was just that this is the time you have to study, and so you focus your mind and you use it. I studied on the bus. I studied wherever I could. It was just the way that it was, right? And I would use a lot of thinking in my mind about what it was that I was studying. And so keep this in mind, that you just use what you have, because timers, can't really help you, and you can't always know what time that you have, and you can't always know how long it's going to take to digest certain thoughts so that they actually can start to collect enough, turgor pressure inside of you to give forth fruit of understanding. And here's another way to think about this point by way of Leonardo da Vinci. So we look at him as a genius who could do it all, but his contemporaries often thought he was a chaotic mess. Why? Well, because he didn't always follow a daily calendar. He didn't have a to-do list. He would leave a masterpiece painting untouched for months to go obsess over the anatomy of a horse's jaw or the geometry of light. And my guess is that Da Vinci knew that letting a rigid schedule just take over his mind would not help him at all. It would stop his mind from cross-pollinating all kinds of ideas. Now, we know that there were some paintings that he finished never, right? But nonetheless, the breakthroughs that he had in many, many areas, they make some of those unfinished paintings worth it. And that's because they make the finished paintings look alive. He managed his attention, is what I'm trying to say, not a freaking clock. Now, to the question of how do you read a book and retain everything, get rid of this word everything. Who would ever listen to you recite everything anyway? What test exists in the world where you are required to copy an entire textbook or series of textbooks down? It doesn't exist. So it's a pseudo question, and there are people who will give you pseudo answers. Oh, well, use this software or do this specific speed reading technique and you will get 100% data retention. Nonsense. There's no such thing as everything in any practical sense. Your brain is, in fact, a filtering machine, not a hard drive. And one of the best things that you can do when you're a student and you want to really impress is condense things down to the direct answer. And if you like direct answers and you're not already subscribed, get subscribed to this channel because we are laying down the law, the truth of these matters. And it would be lovely to have you. And for the love of memory and learning and using memory techniques properly and well, smash that thumbs up. Because, we need to get rid of so many fantasies of absolute retention. When I study complex philosophical treatises or dense legal terminology, I am not trying to vacuum up every single word in my head. Unless, of course, I'm memorizing something verbatim where I am vacuuming up everything in my head. The one that I'm memorizing now, it's got a lot of strange words in it and so forth. But that's because, whatever. It's about Ubu, and it's got some German in it and so forth. And I have to memorize every single word. But, we want to focus and ferret out generalizations and all these words that are in books. There's something called Zipf's law, which shows us that most of what's in a book is the word the, and, if, but, he, she, it, them, they. You don't have to memorize all that stuff. Zero in on the high-value concepts, the structures of the actual book, and encode those kinds of things into your memory palaces and let go of the noise. The only difference is if you're going to memorize verbatim. Like, there's another one I'm memorizing recently. The rebel peddles these CCs, even when vexed peers deem the new precepts mere dreck. I haven't got that quite as smooth and fast as I would like yet, but it goes on. But it's just got wonderful words. There's other part where it's like, we detect the clever scheme, the emergent repeton, the letter E. We jeer, we jest, we express resentment. Like, it's just so beautiful and glorious. That's word by word memorization. I can't just pluck out a random detail. But in most of the things that I've memorized when it comes to philosophy, when it comes to the law, when it comes to whatever I'm studying as a topic, I just go for the golden gems and I memorize a lot less than you'd imagine. In fact, I have a video on this channel. It's one of the most popular videos on this channel called How to Memorize a Textbook. And I talk about the rules for less is more and how that I do that. And it is very, very good at saving a lot of time and still leading to knowing way more than you typically would if you sat there and memorized things word for word. Again, the the contradiction or the opposite is verbatim memorization, but that's a different thing. I would never memorize an entire textbook because most of what I'd be memorizing is just little words. He, she, it, them, they, if, but. It's just not necessary. Think about Thomas Jefferson along these lines. He didn't read books to memorize everything. Instead, he used an actually pretty brutal process of laborious note-taking and then copying of his notes. He used to carry around this little ivory note-taking device on his belt, and he would read books while he was going around, dense law actually, but also philosophy, and he would take these notes on ivory cards, and then he would transcribe only the absolute core ideas into his custom notebooks, which were known as commonplace books. So this is quite laborious, but the thing about taking notes and then copying notes is not that it's tedious or slow, because you might think it's that way, but it's letting go of the need to absorb the entire book, and it's distilling the exact structural arguments, the exact key words, and then some of that later went on to help him draft the Declaration of Independence and help design the University of Virginia from scratch. So he's not a human hard drive. He's more like an editor in many, many ways. And that's, I think, what we can all strive to do to get more done in less time, is rather than being memorizers of everything and note takers where we're copying one book into another, we are sort of editing as we go and trying to get to the core and then letting it crystallize in our mind by how that we engage with the material. Now, the next trap is, how do I make memorized information come to mind naturally when I'm in a live debate? I get this question a lot. And, a lot of people will answer this question. They'll say, well, if your visualization is vivid enough, the data will just automatically float into your consciousness. And that's not been my experience. The reality is that storing information in a memory palace is only part of the equation. You have to work with the material in order to get it smooth. So whether you're on a debate stage or you're pitching a client or you're speaking a foreign language, when you have that pressure on you, you need to have the pathway trained. And so, I was just reciting something that I've memorized and it was a little bit, not quite there yet. And, in order to get faster, you have to train in a particular way. And depending on what the information is, then, you've got to make sure that you understand a little bit about that pressure. Practice while you're relaxed. Get as relaxed as you possibly can. And practice for when you need to retrieve so that you don't actually have to go into memory palaces. So you could talk to yourself, you can write essays, you can engage in internal debates, you can force your brain to navigate memory palaces under varying conditions, and you can try to actually get to the point where you're reciting without reference to the memory palace. And that's ultimately what I practice with my verbatim recitation, is, walking around, and after I've gotten it that I know what the words are, then I start to practice reciting it without reference to the memory palace. So fluency is a product of active recall, not passive storage. And a lot of people seem to think that the memory palace is all about, well, I memorize it and then it's just going to be there forever. They think about it as storage. This is not right. And one of the things you can learn, or a lesson you can take, is from Benjamin Franklin. He transformed himself from a poorly educated printer into one of the most formidable diplomats in the world. And, to master logic and debate, he didn't just read essays and hope the information would float into his mind naturally. He would read an article, take short, cryptic notes on the meaning of each sentence, and some of those pages were very cryptic indeed because he would use them over and over again, and he would erase them and then have holes in the paper, and then he would still write on them and erase again. But he would really deeply absorb everything and produce it from his mind, and then he would lay the material like a book in a drawer or his notes in a drawer, and then he would allow himself to forget the exact words, then force himself to reconstruct the entire argument from scratch again. And this is training the pathway of recall so that you can deploy the knowledge instantly under immense pressure. And in his case, he had immense political pressure indeed in certain parts of his life. Now, before I get to some action steps for you, I want to share a passage from this book by Rick Rubin, The Creative Act. It's really a great book, and when it has a way of being as the subtitle, I mean, that's really something to think about, is how can you make your desire to learn multiple things part of your being. And so this passage here says, as you experiment and craft, more energetic charges are set off as further decisions are made. You catch yourself losing track of time, forgetting to eat, withdrawing from the outside world. Other times the process is a grind. Minutes pass slowly, and you count down the days until the work is complete. A prisoner etching marks on a cell wall. Remember, the energy in the work isn't always accessible to you. At times you take a wrong turn and the charge is lost, or you're so deep in the details you can't see the bigger picture. Even with the greatest work, it's natural for excitement to wax and wane. And why I think that's such an important passage and worth thinking about a lot is that we seem to get addicted to the image and the idea of how a thing should just be total excitement all the time. But there is great adventure waiting for those who can abandon the need for it to be the same way all the time, and to abandon the need for cookie cutter certainties. If you can force yourself, or force isn't really what I mean, but if you can work in such a way to be very, very present and highly adaptable, you're going to be sharper and you're going to enjoy the ride so much more. And believe me, I have to remind myself of these realities all the time. And thank goodness I train not just memory, but my body as much as I possibly can. And it sometimes is the case I have to force myself a little bit to go each morning to the meditation spot, to pick up the book and memorize. And these kinds of reality checks that I'm talking about today, they make everything a lot easier. And I ask myself often when I'm asking questions, is this a real question that has an actual answer? Or is it a pseudo question for which there is no answer? Because I want to stop chasing seductive pseudo answers myself and actually build a functional, real world learning system that gets better and better over time, that respects how the brain actually operates. And if you would like to do that too, get started with the free memory improvement kit that will help you make your memory as strong as it possibly can be. And that's down in the description below. So the number one action step that I can suggest for you that will help you deal with time differently, and it was very useful for me, is to get a journal, and instead of having to-do lists, have a descriptive list. So not what I have to do, but what am I doing? And what I did and where I got this idea, I'm not necessarily sure. But at some point I learned to write down the start time, and then the name of the activity, and then the end time, and then the next and the next and the next. Now, I haven't done this for years, but I did it for a couple of years. And what that did is it made me just not worry or think so much about how little time that I had. And this is so powerful because what it did is it ultimately trained my brain to stop thinking about where all the time went and how little time that I have and so forth, because I could see with my own eyes exactly where every minute went. And it is so very, very powerful for getting a sense of just how much time we all actually have. Because if there's one thing that has never changed, it's the 24 hours in the day that we all have. Because it's really, really important that you learn to change your relationship to time as somebody who wants to master multiple skills. Because mastery, as far as I'm concerned, is constant practice, and it has no destination. And the best way to enjoy it is to just be with the practice and let go of the outcome. So, hope you found this useful. Get the free memory improvement kit using the link on the screen or in the description. And if you want to know more about teaching yourself and various strategies you can use, stick around and watch my video on how to become an autodidact next, someone who teaches oneself. And there's a lot of nuance to it because you don't necessarily teach yourself in the way that that sounds. So thanks as always. And as I always like to say, until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.